Day 2 of Singapore International Energy Week here on the city-state, and after 2 days of intense discussions and strategizing, we appear to have some consensus in terms of where oil prices are headed. I'm Arnold Gay, and joining me today is Serene Gardiner. She is an oil analyst at Glencore, as well as Clyde Russell. He's a columnist at Thomson Reuters. Both of you, welcome to the show. Let me start by asking you, Clyde. We have two sets of numbers coming out today from the consumer countries, as well as a set of numbers coming from the producer countries. At first glance, they appear to be some distance apart, but your point is that they're actually closer than they seem.
Yes, I think the number you're getting from the International Energy Agency is that they think oil should be somewhere between $80 and $100 a barrel. And we had the CEO of Petrobras, Dr. Gabrielli, saying he's very comfortable with oil between $80 to $95 a barrel. The main problem is from Asia. Oil's already quite well above that. Your two main benchmarks for the region are around 105 for Dubai and 110 for Brent. So oil is already above the level that both producers and consumers are saying it should be.
Serene, your thoughts on this? I mean, where do you see oil in terms of fundamentals, supply and demand fundamentals?
From the fundamental side, what we do have is that for 2012, there's going to be, 1.5 or thereabouts of refining capacity expansion. Much of it will be laden within China and India, where demand is organically growing. These refinery expansions has been slated for a long while. I see no reason for them to be, delayed. I mean, they're coming.
So bottom line is, Clyde is right, prices are not going to go below 100, they're going to stay above 100?
That's hard to say because, look, next year is another year. What we do see from a fundamental standpoint is that we do have refining capacity coming next year, and we do have demand growth, although, US and European GDP growth is somewhat anemic. Asia is still very healthy. We have to see as also from the supply side picture how well we're going to be able to, come to meet these demand growth.
Clyde, $100 a barrel, we're above that. What do you think it's going to take, for prices to come down below 100 to the level which TANAKA was talking about, between 70 to 80?
I think you're very unlikely to see oil prices decline much unless you get a severe recession in Europe and the same sort of thing happening in the US. If your sort of base case scenario that Europe muddles along and the US bumps along the bottom for a while and then gradually improves, there's very little reason to see oil prices should be lower. If they're already above 100 and the world economic outlook is pretty gloomy currently, it would have to get worse for prices to fall further. As Serene says, if you look at the demand picture, you've got more and more demand coming through, and that speaks to the fact that prices should remain buoyant. It's always very hard to predict exactly where they're going to go, but the trend is definitely there. Demand is going to exceed supply, and that speaks to higher prices.
$100 a barrel is an alarming number at first glance again, but both of you agree, in essence, that high prices may not actually be a bad thing. Let me start with you, Serene. I mean, your thoughts on that?
If you we go back in history, let's go back to the 70s when we had oil shock. What it did trigger is a whole swathe of conservation policies, both from the ground up as well as from governmental level. So it remains to be seen how much can we, encourage people to conserve.
Clyde, your thoughts?
Well, I think if you listen to what you're hearing at this conference, you get a lot of feedback from the people who are doing renewable energy that they feel that they're crowded out of the market by your traditional fossil fuel producers. And the basic truth is, if you want to have more renewable energy, you have to price fossil fuel where it starts to become competitive with renewable energy. That means higher fossil fuel prices. So if you want to push a green agenda, you're really looking for higher prices for the fossil fuels. And I think that's where you have to go. If you want to drive technical innovation in other types of energy, you need to price fossil fuels at a higher level.
Is that at all possible? I mean, you're talking about removal of subsidies, which obviously is a politically charged issue in many Asian countries.
Well, I think Asian countries are starting to take steps to remove subsidies. The Chinese have floated their petrol prices and their diesel prices a little bit more, same in India. But I think what you really need to get is a point where they want to remove all the subsidies and actually start looking at taxing fuel products more like what Europeans do, and then use the revenue raised from that to address the welfare issues around helping the poor populations.
Serene, your thoughts? Do you actually see any concerted move on the part of Asian governments to remove some of these subsidies which have been artificially keeping prices below where they should be?
It's a chicken and an egg issue. If the prices stay high, it will put pressure on government expenditure, and at some point, they have to think about it. On the other hand, like you say, prices are high because of subsidies, but subsidies are going to, be under a lot of pressure from an expenditure standpoint because the prices are high. So something's got to give. Just see which one's first.
Clyde, back to you. One discussion which emerged from today's meetings also was about the use of gas and coal to power stations. I mean, what's the takeaway there? I mean, are we actually going to see what some are calling a regressive move, a move towards using coal?
I think in Asia there's a tremendous demand for electricity. The projections talk to sort of hundreds of gigawatts being needed in the next 20, 30 years. Much of that is going to come from coal, and simply because coal is the cheapest way to generate electricity. And unless you make concerted efforts to tax coal, that will remain the case. So the temptation is always going to be for governments to look at the cheapest way of doing things. Coal's plentiful, it's available, and it's a nice, easy way to do things. They're not really that focused upon the carbon emissions point and whether it is indeed causing global warming and whether that should be the number one priority. Right now, the number one priority is cheap energy, and that's coal.
Okay. Clyde, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. That's Clyde Russell, columnist at Thomson, Reuters, and also to our guest, Serene Gardiner, who is an oil analyst at Glencore. I'm Arnold Gay here in Singapore at the International Energy Week for Reuters.